So today the topic is our most important natural resource, our body-mind. So here's a few statements. See how they land with you. It's been a full day. I feel tired. I'm checking my phone every few minutes to see if the message I sent has been answered. I feel worried about everything in the news and helpless to do anything about it. Any of those resonate? What about these? Going out tonight, I feel really buzzy and excited. I love my pet. I absolutely know that when I get home, she's always pleased to see me. I've been sick, and this is the first day I feel well again. There should be a word for this state of thankfulness alongside fragility. These may seem like small little moments, maybe even unremarkable moments in our lives. But what I'd like to cover today is a sense that these moments are the building blocks of our day. And those same building blocks are the building blocks of our lives. And learning anything important, learning music or learning a sport, means starting with the basics. And what we've done so far is think about the skills of gathering our attention. And once we've done that, we start to have this incredible choice, right? This choice of being able to focus on what we think is important and what brings us joy. This body that we spoke about as being perhaps maybe something that we don't pay much attention to, and when we pay attention to it in a sort of problematic way, can in fact be an anchor, a sanctuary, a guide, and a teacher. All the while, we're befriending our mind. What do I mean? Befriending our mind by cultivating these qualities of curiosity and appreciation. Attitudes of mind that kind of enrich our lives because they enrich the frame of reference that we bring to our lives. So what I want to do today is explore how this most important natural resource, our body and our mind, which we have from the moment we're born to our final breath, accompanies us, and how we can unpack these small moments as the building blocks of our life. Because unpacking it is also the sort of beginning of choice, the beginning of opening, the beginning of wise responding. So I'm going to start with a somewhat bold statement, and then I'm going to walk through 4 different steps. So here's the bold statement. Descartes was wrong. Famous 17th century philosopher who said, "I think, therefore I am." He was saying, I have consciousness, I can think, and that's what makes me human. Well, that was his best understanding of philosophy at that time. But what I'd like to suggest is I think we can now say fairly clearly, drawing on what we know about neuroscience, what we know about the body, what we know about psychology, is that Descartes was wrong. In fact, Descartes even went further. He had this idea of there was a kind of a gland between the brain and the body, the pineal gland, and he thought maybe that's the place in which the mind and the body maybe have that kind of bridge of that conduit, if you like. But actually, the way in which our experience gets created, the way in which any moment gets created is completely a manifestation of both the body and the mind. So take that statement, I've been sick, and this is the first day I feel well again. There should be a word for this state of thankfulness and fragility. Just the very thought of, gosh, I've woken up I've been really unwell, and I can see there's a turning point in my health. That thought shifts the way we feel. It's the same way if we go to a doctor and they give us a diagnosis. Now that we know what it is, all of a sudden we feel different. We maybe even feel a little bit better, a bit more in control. And what I'd like to start doing actually from this point onwards is not using the words body and mind, but using the phrase body mind. Because pretty well everything that happens to us, everything that we experience, is a manifestation of the body mind. Let me try and make that a little bit more real. Think about the tree of evolution and the various branches where we came away from different species. And there is a branch quite a long way back where we came away from gazelles. Gazelles that live in groups in the African savannah, but have in common with us really quite a lot in terms of their body mind. So this is going to be a slightly strange invitation, but I'd like to ask you to imagine yourself as a gazelle in the middle of a herd of gazelles, and you are going about your day as a gazelle. Bear with me, this is going somewhere. So imagine yourself, you're surrounded by dozens, if not hundreds of other gazelles, and you're moving from place to place, looking for grazing and finding grazing, and grazing on the food, then finding water or shelter and moving as a herd. There's a sense of being in the middle of this herd amongst the young and the old, the strong and the weak. But there's very much a sense of being part of a herd, looking together for resources, looking together for danger. When all is well, there's a sense that you can kind of relax and be part of this herd. You're registering safety, you're allowed to graze, you're able to drink. You also know that the gazelles on the outside of the herd are always monitoring for danger. If they see a cheetah, for example, they'll alert the whole group. The whole group will move immediately from a mode, including you, including me, to high alert. And then the herd as a whole will take action. Run or turn towards the cheetah until it goes away, whatever's needed. But the minute the danger goes away, the whole tightness of the group goes back to a sense of homeostasis, a sense of balance. We have so much overlap with gazelles as social animals. We're looking for safety, we're looking for resources, we're looking for a sense of who's our in-group, who's our out-group. But we have one real difference from gazelles, and that is that we have the ability to think about our experience, to remember the past, and to think about the future. So gazelles are incredibly attuned in their sort of nervous system to looking for novelty, looking for danger, looking for whatever. But the minute that goes away, they settle really quickly back down again. We, because we have this ability to think, are in that group of gazelles, and we're thinking about what's just happened. So imagine that you're a bit prone to anxiety. You're in the middle of the gazelles, you're grazing or whatever, but you've got in your head a representation of a cheetah, or that time when there wasn't enough food to go around, or somebody who's prone to depression is remembering the time that their uncle was actually caught by the cheetah, and they're thinking, oh, poor Hank, why did he have to get caught by the cheetah? That will be me next time. And that ability to think, that ability to represent our experience with language is one of the really differentiating things about our body mind from so many other species. It's one of our tremendous strengths, but also something that can be a source of both amazing things in our lives, but also difficult things in our lives. So what I'd like to do is just to go into a sort of process of unpacking a little bit. But before I do that, I just want to give a word to the philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti, who put it this way: the day you teach the child the name of the bird, the child will never see that bird again. The day you teach the child the name of the bird, the child will never see that bird again. What he's pointing to is the way in which language and all of our past experience can be so helpful because we can label something a bird. But in that labeling, we're also packing our experience into a particular experience. Why is that important? Let me turn now to this sense of those experiences I was talking about, unpacking them into 4 different parts. And we can do this kind of experientially as we go through. So the first part is our bodily sensations. We can take a moment now just to scan through the body with a kind of lightness and a curiosity and an interest. There might be some parts of the body where we feel tingling or pleasant sensations. There might be some tension or some fatigue or some tightness or some contraction. So this is one of the 4 parts of our experience. If we unpack our experience and see it for what it is, we can just in any moment drop into our body and have this sense of what's happening. What is the myriad of experiences in my body in this moment? That's part 1. Part 2 is our emotional landscape. Lisa Feldman Barrett's psychologist and a neuroscientist who's written and thought a lot about emotions. And one of the key takeaways I'd like to suggest from her work is how incredibly useful and important our emotions can be to us because they're communicating something to us about what's happening. Traditionally, people talked about these sort of elementary emotions, these 5 elementary emotions of happiness, anger, surprise, sadness, disgust, and fear. I think probably there's an acknowledgement that that's overly simplistic and that actually emotions in terms of their complexity are on more of a kind of dimension. There might be some more complex emotions like humility, which is maybe a combination of self-awareness and freedom from ego, freedom from pride. There are some emotions that involve maybe more thinking. They add a story to what's happening. So gratitude, I guess, is an example of that. I'm so glad that happened. Or disappointment. I'm kind of sorry or upset that that happened. We can also think about our emotions as being on a scale. To think about contented, to happy, to really happy, to ecstasy. They can have a tone, they can be pleasant, they can be kind of neutral, and they can be positive. And they can have a sort of, what's the word? A sort of imprint in our bodies. In fact, there's been a really lovely work coming out of a Finnish lab in which the group asked people to characterize where they experienced emotions in the body. And emotions like love and joy cover so much different parts of the body, the face, the torso, the hands, the arms. And others are much more kind of in particular parts of the body, a sense of shame, for example, and in the gut and in the stomach. So we've got bodily sensations, these four parts that I'm talking about. Then we've got emotions. And then the third part we've got is what I'm going to call impulses or calls to action. In any moment, if we drop into the body, we can go, what is the kind of sense of the body's state of kind of behavior right now? Sorry, let me explain that a bit more. Is there a kind of sense of wanting to turn inwards and be still, or is there a sense of kind of being quite agitated? You know, you want to move around and you feel kind of energetic. So we can look at the body and we can just come and have this sense of, are there any impulses and calls to action? And these are really, really interesting and really important for all sorts of reasons, not the obvious ones, although those are really important, of the sort of basic fight, flee, freeze kind of reactions. But there's also lots more nuance that we can really get into when we look at our impulses. What's our state of arousal? Are we feeling kind of sluggish and tired? Or really activated and energized? There might be particular calls to action. Anger. And it's going to be different for each of us. Self-control, striking out. Fear. Happiness often has this kind of, in terms of a call to action, sort of a more expansive and outward kind of call to action. And there's, real sense of exploration in here, right? So if you take, for example, humility, and again, please take everything I say as a sort of an inquiry, an investigation. Humility can help us recognize when we've done something good and then moderate our response. And if you contrast that then with pride, oh, I've done something good, and act big-headed. But if you think about a child who does something good, they just have this sense of joy. Oh, I can't believe I just did that handstand. I just got that puzzle solved, or whatever it might be. So pride can be this kind of humble and lovely thing, or it can be, in terms of an impulse and a call to action, that expression, pride before the fall. And then, of course, we get the fourth area, which is an area we know so well, because it's the realm of thoughts and imagery and remembering and planning and daydreaming and thinking in all of its forms. It's so rich, it's so interesting. We can imagine the future, we can tell stories about the past, we can imagine whole worlds and write stories and books about them. But of course, the thing about this is we're doing this ourselves all the time. We're telling ourselves stories about what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, what's happening, what our place is. Are we a good guy? Are we a bad guy? Are we, what's our role in this play? And this stuff is so powerful and so interesting. And I like to tell the story sometimes of in my group at the University of Oxford, we very typically will have people in the group from lots of different countries in the world. And of course, they speak different languages. And of course, they come speaking English. But what I very quickly understood, and I was helped by a German postdoc, is that even though they speak English, their mother tongue is not English. And what the English say is not what the English mean. And so this German postdoc in my group created this spreadsheet so that everybody in the group could understand what the English say, what the English mean, and what everybody else understands. So if an English person says very interesting, of course, that can be said in lots of different ways. To a non-native English speaker, that sounds like, well, they think what I've just said is interesting. But it might or may not mean that. If an English person says, this is in no sense a rebuke, the person might go, gosh, I'm so relieved they're not cross with me. But actually, That probably means I'm absolutely furious with you, and I'm just letting you know it. This is in no sense a rebuke. So this four-part model is a way, a sort of basic building block of mindfulness for life and being able to begin to understand our experience as being in any moment the possibility of pausing and asking, what's happening in my body? What's happening emotionally? What's happening in terms of an impulse or a call to action? And what thoughts and feelings are happening? And this is such a rich and interesting inquiry because, of course, there are lots of states like embarrassment or anxiety where we go, well, is that a feeling? Is that a mind state? What is that exactly? And with all of these things, the invitation is to turn that into an inquiry for yourself. What does anxiety look like for you? For some people, it's very bodily. For others, it's a kind of very mental loop that kind of predominates. So these four building blocks that I've not introduced them as a sort of abstract idea. I've introduced them because they're really useful to us in our lives. And what I'd like to do is to give voice to two characters who I develop all the way through my book, Mindfulness for Life. Sam's a young man in his early 20s. He is working as a nurse in an intensive care unit. And Ling is a single mother in her 40s with teenage kids. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share my screen so that I can just play a 2 or 3 minute clip of Sam and Ling describing some learning that they had from their bodies and from these moments that is a kind of unpacking of these four different parts. So just bear with me while I just share my screen. So here we go. There's also evidence that even though we may think we're tuned into our bodies, we're not as accurate as we think we are.
OMG, puberty. Total nightmare. Felt like I was the last one of everyone I knew to hit puberty. I acted like I didn't give a damn, including to myself. I pulled on this geekiness cloak, acting like I was a tech and gaming wizard. I guess it was a safety cloak, my way of staying safe. But recently, I've been turning to paying attention to my body and seeing what helps. At work, to feel more confident, with self-talk like, "You've got this, Sam," to have that sense of, hell yes. I guess feeling comfortable in my own skin and in my love life being able to be myself, give and take and let go.
Sam smiles.
I'm not nerdy. I'm a ninja.
A few months ago, I was having some mood swings, not like anything I was used to, and had this kind of brain fog. I'd wake in the middle of the night wide awake. But I just got on with my life. It was only when my period started becoming irregular that I thought, what's happening? I made an appointment with my doctor, and she said I was going into perimenopause and offered me hormone replacement patches. Duh, how did I not know that? How did I miss what my body was telling me? I've really noticed how the patches have helped my thinking, sleep, and mood.
Having a sense of control over life means using our natural So this is two examples from this young man, Sam, and Ling, this woman in her 40s, of how this learning to really lean into pausing and checking in can be really helpful to us in a whole range of different ways. So bringing this all into our lives towards a life well lived, that's the first part. This choosing to begin much more intentionally pausing and checking in as we move through our day. We've talked about doing this at the start of the day, at the end of the day, and maybe as key kind of transition points throughout the day. I attended a talk earlier today from somebody at Washington State University and Google, where they're looking at sort of sensors in the body and self-reports. And people who are a bit prone to anxiety and depression, they can often, when they wake up, the first thing when they wake up, they can go into quite a high state of arousal. Presumably that's because they're worried about the day ahead. So being able to pause and check in with these four parts of, oh, okay, I'm worried about the day ahead and my body's getting a bit kind of activated. I've got this sense of going into hyper arousal quite quickly. I've got all these ideas about what might happen during the day. Pausing and checking in at that moment is a possibility, is the beginning to think about doing things in a different way. That's the first part. Pausing and checking in, making that a habit with this four-part model. The second way we can really bring this into our life in a way that is incredibly powerful is beginning to intentionally choose to pause and notice and savor the positive moments in our lives. As we move through the day, every time something happens where there's a sense of, that's something lovely, that's a moment of connection, that's a moment of beauty, that's a moment of a nice emotion perhaps, to really drop into that and allow that to move from being a good moment to a good experience. And the same with negative experiences. Pausing and seeing these moments and seeing how they can coalesce into experiences that potentially become problematic and part of a story. I'm somebody who's prone to anxiety, and this is another example of things going wrong. Just seeing those chaining of moments is the possibility in the beginning of seeing those links that can each of them be broken. Pausing and checking in, positive experiences, negative experiences. And what I'd like to do next is, in terms of bringing this into everyday practice, invite you to pick up your phone. But before you do that, pause and check in. What's the state of your body in this moment? Scanning briefly through the body. Is there any particular emotional tone around for you at the moment? If anything, is there a kind of call to action, an impulse? What's the state of your mind just now? And maybe just changing the posture so there's a sense of kind of being upright and open, the chest is open, a sense of dignity and uprightness. And when you're ready, what I'd like to invite you to do is to, with awareness, and by with awareness, I mean keeping a part of your awareness in your body-mind, pick up your phone. Don't turn it on, just pick it up and feel the weight of it in your hand. And as you feel the weight of it in your hand and you look at it turned off, what's the state of your body-mind? See if you can hold part of your awareness on yourself and part of your awareness on the feeling of the phone in your hand and the sight of it. And now, again, very intentionally and holding awareness on your body-mind, just turning the phone on. Just nothing more than that, just turning it on. And as you turn it on and you look at the home screen, what's the state of your body-mind just now? Don't interact with anything on there just now. And you might see some notifications pulling your awareness, but don't necessarily do anything with that just yet. And just hold awareness of your body-mind in this moment. What's happening in your body? What's the state of your mind? Is there any call to action, any impulse right now? What I'd like to invite you to do now is keep part of your awareness in your body-mind and go to one of the apps on your phone that you perhaps use the most and just open it up. Keep some of your awareness for yourself and just see what happens as you open this app up and Feel free just to scroll through if you're on some kind of messaging app or on Instagram, whatever it might be, but keep some of your awareness for yourself. Okay, now very intentionally, very deliberately, choose to stop. Just put the phone down, maybe so the screen's face down so you can't see it. And just come back into the body-mind and the sense of sitting here in contact with the ground, the seat, breathing. So that's the so-called phone practice. And what I'd like to invite you to reflect on, first of all, is what did you notice? What came up for you as you did that? What bodily sensations, what emotions, what impulses, what thoughts and feelings came up? And what I'd like to do now is a very, very brief bit of couples therapy. What do I mean by that? So this is your phone. This is something with which you have a relationship. So in terms of couples therapy, let's just do a little bit of a kind of relationship inventory. Is this relationship serving me? Are you both committed to this relationship? Do you need more time together or more time apart? What would it be like if you had a trial separation? Sometimes when couples have a trial separation, they have time apart and they realize they really love each other and they come back together again. And sometimes they go, gosh, maybe we should have a longer separation. What are the good parts of your relationship? What about the problematic parts? So all of this is explored more in the book, Mindfulness for Life, and using the phone, which for many of us is very much part of our life for lots of good reasons, as a way of exploring this four-part model. People sometimes call mobile phones weapons of mass distraction. But they're also sometimes called extended part of our consciousness or awareness. They can add so much value to our lives in terms of connections with people who live far away, in terms of the photographs that can remind us of pleasant and lovely moments, in terms of information that can enrich our lives. So this is a practice for really, in a way, I particularly I'm using the phone because for many people it's something that very much is part of their lives. So it can serve as a way of really teaching us about this four-part model and a constant reminder to do that. So I'd like to just cover one more thing and then close with a practice. So if we have this four-part model, and in the book, so that's bodily sensations, emotions, impulses, and thoughts and imagery and language. And in the book, I talk about the importance of a fifth part, which is how that is always shaped by what's happening in our day and the people around us and in our lives and our life history and everything else. And it shapes that in turn. And I'll leave that for another time. But what I want to just briefly cover is what drives the way in which our experience can so quickly coalesce into that experience of that sense of anxiety at the start of a day, or that sense of feeling really safe in the presence of someone that we love and find inspiring. Well, ancient wisdom, Buddhist psychology in particular, teaches us that there is an incredible kind of drive for this process, which is captured with this word tanha, which loosely translates as sort of thirst, but a thirst that can never be quenched. It's a bit like kind of somebody at sea in the ocean who is stranded, and they could see the ocean all around them, and they know that that salt water will never quench their thirst. And in Buddhist psychology, this idea of tanha is like we're constantly searching for something that never is going to happen. And that drives, it's like the driver for this process of how we put the building blocks together of every experience. In modern psychology, we have the idea of this heady mix of the mind is, for evolutionary reasons, for very good reasons, inclined to anything that's new, anything that's relevant, and actually anything that's negative, because it might signal something that we have to pay attention to. So we have this inclination to look for novelty, to look for salience, to look for the negative. And we learn in these incredible, powerful ways. And we know this from sort of Skinnerian psychology. And it's so powerful, this idea, the obvious one, which everyone knows, which is that if something is reinforced, and particularly if it's intermittently reinforced, that's a really powerful way in which we learn anything. So, if you give a dog a treat, it'll learn to do that thing. If you give that treat irregularly, it'll learn it even more powerfully. But one of the things that people that know less about is the very powerful learning that comes from negative reinforcement. What I mean by that is when something that we do removes a bad feeling, that's called negative reinforcement. So if I feel bored or a little bit jittery and I pick up my phone and it takes that feeling away, that is negative reinforcement. And then the final thing about driving this 4-5-part model is the whole tendency to storying. If I have a story about myself as someone who suffers from depression, somebody who suffers from anxiety, that's going to frame the way in which all the experiences are potentially locked together and put together. So this drive, this sort of learning through reinforcement, positive and negative, the kind of storying that we have, this is what drives the way in which experiences are maybe put together. So I want to give the final word to Edith Eger, who I thought of earlier this week because I was listening to her on a podcast. She's 97 years old. And she was, at the age of 16, interned with her sister and her parents in a concentration camp. And she was a dancer, so she was just 16 years old, and she endured this unimaginable horror in the camp. And she described a couple of moments, which I want to just relate to you as an illustration of the whole process of experiences being so potentially seminal and so potentially formative throughout our lives and for a lifetime. As a young girl, the infamous Joseph Mengele, who was the doctor in the camp, tried to put together a kind of orchestra, and he wanted somebody to be a dancer. And Edith Eger was a dancer before she went into the camp. And her friends pushed her forwards and said, Edith is a dancer. And Mengele insisted that he dance for her. And she describes in that moment feeling incredible fear that she might be, something bad might happen to her, as indeed it happened to many people in the camp, of course. And she said it was the best dance she ever did in her life. That fear somehow enabled her to dance in a way that it saved her life, I guess. And afterwards, I guess Mengele was pleased with her and he threw her a loaf of bread. And she took the bread back to the barracks that night and she shared the bread with her barrack mates, which I guess was not necessarily a typical thing to do given how incredibly sparse food was and how unwell many people were. And towards the end of the war, the Germans were marching these young people away from the camp to a different place. And they were all exhausted and malnourished, and many of them collapsed and died on this march. And in fact, Edith described collapsing. And uncharacteristically, the people around her picked her up and helped her to carry on the march. And she said to them, "Why have you done that? Nobody's doing that. Everybody's just so tired and emaciated." And they said, "We remembered the moment with the loaf of bread." And I'm telling that story because these are two small moments in, not small moments, very profound moments in Edith's life that completely shaped and changed her life. And I'm telling it also because I want to just end on this idea that this work is both really basic and really foundational, but it's for life and for a lifetime. And one of the things I didn't know, which I learned during this podcast, was Edith said that it took her maybe, decades after she left the camp to begin to have some of the insights she had that she started to write about in her famous book, The Choice. And then some of the insights that she only had much later when she had a job and she was next to a museum. And it took her a long time, a lifetime, for some of these learnings to come out. So the takeaway I hope you'll take from today is that from the moment we are born to the moment we die, we have this incredible resource, our body, mind. And having a sense of understanding it, have a sense of how experiences coalesce for us is the beginning of starting to have choices about how they coalesce and the possibility that things might coalesce in a different way and in a way that actually is new, is interesting, and has a sense of not knowing quite where it will go. So I try to, between webinars, post on Instagram and various other places to give a sense, and the Oxford Mindfulness Foundation does the same thing, a sense of some of the ideas and practices that can be in the support of this idea of our body mind as our most important natural resource. And I want to just leave you with this one practice, which is called deep listening and speaking. And just have a sense of coming into your body and into your mind with a sense of listening with real care, real kindness, and real depth to what's happening in your body and mind in this moment. And I use this expression lightly, but also not lightly. Listening as if your life depended on it. To the myriad sensations, emotional tones, thoughts and imagery that might be around. And the possibility that this deep listening can actually play out in also how we listen and speak with other people as we move throughout our day and our week. So maybe making and forming an intention that this deep listening and speaking, both to ourselves and to others, might be a practice that can be used in the weeks ahead to explore the sense of our body and mind as an important natural resource. Thank you very much for your attention.